Hello everyone, welcome to What the Theory with Joel. My name is Joel, and today we're going to be doing nihilism. But before I get into the topic, please subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell so that you're always kept up to date whenever I drop a new video. Right, so today's leading quote is from The Will to Power by Friedrich Nietzsche. It says, "What does nihilism mean? That the highest values devaluate themselves. The aim is lacking. The question why finds no answer." So, the first time the word nihilism was used is in a novel from 1862, obviously by a Russian author. Those guys are always writing the saddest stuff. It's called Fathers and Sons, and in that book, this is the quote of what a nihilist is. At some point, one of the main characters asks their dad what does it mean to be a nihilist. And he says, "A nihilist is a man who does not bow down before any authority, who does not take any principle on faith, whatever reverence that principle may be enshrined in." Now, the next few episodes, I'm going to be talking about nihilism, and the reason is both personal and universal. Personal because I think the first blog I ever wrote was about my loss of faith as a Christian, and I think that period of losing faith was pivotal in terms of me getting introduced to what it means to not believe in anything, to go from believing God is everything and He orders the entire universe to, if I'm not sure that God exists, what does that mean for everything else? And so that's part of the exploration for today. And then as we move on, I'll talk about why more universally it's an experience I think more and more people are having in the modern day. Now, in talking about believing in nothing, if you go on the internet or if you go on Instagram, the funniest accounts, in my opinion, are usually nihilistic ones. They're usually the ones that make a joke of everything, that don't uphold any value, who don't hold anything sacred. If anything can be said about the modern day, it's that ideas of things being sacred or ideas of things being divine are, more or less undercut. Yeah, they are mocked. They are, used as punchlines. And I think for an older generation, when they look at that, they sort of see that our generation is quite nihilistic. But when you ask the average person on the street, they might not audibly say that they're nihilistic, but I think they find that having an ironic distance to everything that they're doing prevents them from being disappointed. And in The Will to Power, which I'm going to be quoting from a lot, the discussion is that, so Nietzsche's whole idea was that over the last 2,000 years, Christianity had been the most important value that everyone had. It gave meaning to their lives. You understood whether you were a prince or a pauper, whether you were a thief or a nobleman, whether you were a slave or you were a king. All of us had the same father. We had the same sort of plan for us. If we dedicated our lives to the Lord, we would be saved, rescued, and brought into this other world. So in speaking about the two world theories, I spoke about that in episode 5. If you haven't seen that, you should go and check it out. It's the discussion of the true world theories. And that's basically the idea that there are two worlds, the apparent world that we see around us, and then the world that is beyond, the one that is perfect, the one that is instantiated forever. And in order for us to make sense of this world, we take values from the world that is beyond. So we don't trust in appearances, we don't trust in riches, we don't trust in anything this world has to give us. We look at the things that come from that come from outside of this world. But if that world then disappears, if the belief in that world disappears, then we're left with nothing to hold on to. There's nothing that makes sense. Everything is simply apparent. And, you could talk about nihilism in 4 different ways. There is the moral nihilism. So that one is basically people who think that there is no such thing as an objective good and evil. That good and evil are subjective judgments that we make. They're culturally dependent. So in one culture, for instance, taking an example right now, I think it's between New Jersey and New York. I could be corrected if the laws have changed, but I remember that people used to drive from New York into New Jersey. Like they would pick up girls in clubs in New York and drive to New Jersey to sleep with them. And that's because in New Jersey, the age of consent, I believe, was something like 17, and in New York it's 18. So the question was, how can something be moral a few kilometers down the road versus over here, like, yeah, fine, we can do whatever we want. It's sort of, it's based on the agreement of the individuals who live in a certain place. So if that's the case for something like that, when we say that stealing is wrong, by what basis do we have to make that judgment? On what authority are we making that judgment? And the divine command theory holds it that it's because God says it's wrong, and so no man can question it. Those are objective facts within the world, but if you remove God, that all breaks apart. So that's moral nihilism. The second is epistemological nihilism. Now that denies the fact that there can never be a truth, the fact that there can be something that you can say this is true forever and that we can know it. So it could fall into two places. It could be that there are objective truths in the world, but we will never know them, that humanity doesn't have the capacity, we don't have the, I guess, perspective to be able to have a God's eye view. The third form of nihilism is cosmic nihilism, and that I'll just read it here from a book called The Spectre of the Absurd. It's that cosmic nihilism disavows intelligibility or value in nature. It sees it as indifferent, hostile to fundamental human concerns, and hostile to fundamental human concerns. So you've got the lack of belief in morality. Well, you think it's subjective, it depends on whoever it serves. You look at the ability for us to know anything for certain, and then lastly, that the universe and nature have any meaning. Now those three, you can have a portion of that and still not be fully nihilistic. You could not believe that morality is objective, but still believe that the universe has some sort of sense. You may not think that truth is able to be found, but you think it's objectively existing in the world. Or you may think that, you know, the cosmos is hostile to us, but human beings have a moral obligation, because it's possible for you to be nihilistic and a person of faith. But then existential nihilism combines all of those. It's the negation of the meaning of life. And when I talk about meaning of life, I talk about two things. One, it's that for something to have meaning, it signifies something. Like this skull, which just broke. It signifies to me the fact that life ends. It's a signification of the mortality of human beings. So for me, that's the meaning of this skull. If someone else has another meaning, to them it signifies something else. But also the second form of meaning is that it gives you a reason for something existing. So one, it either signifies some symbol, or it it shows you the reason for something existing. Like this table exists so that I can do these shows and put my laptop on top. This shirt exists so that you guys don't see my muscles and fall in love with me. Now, the idea behind existential nihilism could be captured by the statement, existence precedes essence. Now, all of human life up until this point, up until I think maybe the 1800s, most human beings never had to ask the meaning of their lives. It was not a question that made sense. They were born into a community that told them who they were, what their traditions were, how they were supposed to live, and they had a place in society. But as technological progress kept moving, we got sort of removed from nature. Most of us don't know how our food is even made. We don't know how electricity comes to our houses. Like, we are sort of disenfranchised from the things that allow us to remain existing. Someone 100 years ago was intimately connected to their environment, just like a bird is intimately connected to a nest. But a human being right now can, move in any type of environment, and that dislocation has an impact on our understanding of what it means to be ourselves, what it means to have a meaning. So to talk about that existence preceding essence, a cup, for instance, it's created with the purpose in mind that you're going to drink from it. And so if you believe in a God, you would assume, at least for some people who believe in God, that you were created with a purpose in mind, and that allows you to know whether you're on the right track or not, if you're misusing your life or not. But if you then take the idea that you exist and then you start to determine your essence, that means the full moral responsibility of becoming who you are is on you, that you have to own it, that whether you were given certain circumstances or not, you still have the responsibility for what you do with those circumstances. To read Sartre's point from Being and Nothingness, what is meant here by saying that existence precedes essence? It means, first of all, that man exists, he turns up and appears on the scene, and only afterwards defines himself. If man, as the existentialist conceives him, is indefinable, it is because at first he is nothing. Only afterward will he be something, and he himself will have made what he will be. So the responsibility is that you are not defined, you are the one who gives that definition. And to live in bad faith, as he calls it, is to allow other people to define you, even though you internally don't accept the responsibility of defining yourself. You can very easily give it away. So why am I talking about nihilism a lot? I think that as we've grown into the information age, as things have only gotten better in terms of the way we understand science and the way we understand the natural world, we've sort of undercut the meaning behind things. We sort of we have to have an ironic distance, because all that information removes our place in the universe. We are no longer the center of the universe. We are no longer the most important and separate thing from animals and from nature. We no longer can be sure that our morality and our God is the only one and everyone universally believes in it. Several people have different gods and ideologies, and we're told to be pluralistic and, allow and accord other people their beliefs, and they're just as valid as our own. And from that, then you have no way of sort of saying, well, what does my truth mean? What does it mean for me to say it's my truth? And as nihilism starts to grow, I think Nietzsche's point when he wrote God is dead, I used to think that phrase was, written in celebration, like, yeah, God is dead and yeah, anything is permissible. But it seems to me from reading the work that he was doing is he was saying that this is an inevitability that is coming. And he was talking about European and Western culture in particular, that it was not from being too far from God, it was not from straying too far from Christianity, but from being too close to it. That if you combine Christianity and you combine science, eventually you start to see that it is not the only interpretation of the world, that it is a interpretation. But since you held that it was the only true interpretation from which you would get value in this world, once it disappears, all you're left with is meaningless nihilism. There are a few friends of mine, maybe talking from a more personal point of view, who, when I left the church, also decided to leave. They had many questions, and like 3 of us, we began talking about it. And 2 of those people, the other 2, went back to the church. And one of them I was speaking to eventually, and they said to me something that's it stuck with me for a while. They just said that, well, out beyond the excitement of nothing else matters and you can just move through life doing whatever you want, I needed a reason to wake up. I needed some reason to get through suffering. And I think that's probably why it's very difficult for us to let go of certain beliefs, even for those people who doubt. I don't assume that everyone is inevitably going to become a godless heathen. But I think that the hatred that Nietzsche used to portray for Christianity is, he sort of spoke about it as it has nihilism sort of embedded in it, because it postulates that this world doesn't really matter. It's simply a stage before the next world. And so it devalues this life. This life is merely, I guess, a temporary vision. We only see, like I think Paul said, we only see in part now. We see as if through a veil, that we're not yet seeing the true existence, the true meaning of things. So it allows you to move through this world. It gives purpose when you're suffering, but it devalues everything that's around you, because it just says, well, it's just apparent, it's not real. And his point is that the only world that exists is the one that's before us. We have no proof of anything else. And if we're to make the most of this existence, we have to find a revaluation of values that would make sense of this world. Often he's called a nihilist, but I think he's the farthest thing from it. I think he just, when he talks about being a nihilist, I'll I'll talk about one of the last quotes from The Gay Science here. It's a scientific interpretation of the world as you understand might be one of the most stupid of all possible interpretations of the world, meaning that it would be one of the poorest in meaning. This thought is intended for the ears and consciences of our mechanists, who nowadays like to pass as philosophers and insist that mechanics is the doctrine of the first and last laws on which all existence must be based as the ground floor. But an essentially mechanical world would be an essentially meaningless world, assuming that one estimated the value of a piece of music according to how much of it could be counted, calculated, and expressed in formulas. How absurd would such a scientific estimation of music be? What would one have to comprehend, understand, or grasp of it? Nothing, really nothing of what is music is in it. So to me, I like that because you can understand all the different notes, you can calculate how long a song is, but it's not the meaning behind music. And so clinging on to science and, it's not a matter of rejoicing to say that we understand more and more of the world, because those understandings are numbers, they are data, they don't provide values beyond that. And so his point is that nihilism was going to be inevitable with European culture and with Western culture. And interestingly, also, when you talk about being an atheist, he didn't seem to believe that most people would be true atheists, because to be one, you would have to give up not only a God, but you'd give up also the beliefs that having a God supports. But a lot of people might deny God, but then still hold on to those values. And so that's what he means, that over time it will start to rot away. Eventually you start to reach catastrophe, because the thing that's supposed to give it power, even Christians talk about it, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. I think that's the point that we are in. If you look at, even in Uganda, many people swear on Bibles, many people sort of pay lip service to the church or to those greater beliefs, but they don't embody it, they don't live according to it. And his point was, if you live that way, eventually you're becoming a nihilist, you're becoming someone who doesn't have any real value. You simply parrot it, or you simply refer to it and not really hold on to anything. And the danger is, if you stay there, is that then anything becomes permissible, and then you're not able to endure suffering. Instead of suffering, you need distractions. And I guess, at least for me, I know I have so many distractions, one of which is powered by this. I'm always watching something else. I'm always listening to some music. It's gotten better over time, but I think I spent a lot of time distracting myself from the thoughts around what does my life mean now that I no longer hold on to these values. And I think in the next episode, we'll talk about the difference between being an active and passive nihilist and why you have to overcome those things. So thank you for watching, and check out the next episode.